In 1381, peasants from the southwest of England rose up in revolt. From Kent, Sussex, and Essex, they banded together and marched on London. But this was not one mass crowd moving together. No, this was formed of smaller communities, villages and towns who, via a network communicating in code, they were able to stir up a number of people to react against Richard II's government's taxes, the invasive taxes that were being levied upon them, and the way that it was being executed, the searching of young women to check if they were of age, and so on and so forth. This movement involved thousands of peasants who, although initially motivated by this very, very harsh and invasive tax, would move on, due to their leaders, into a more ideological mode, that the protest grew beyond just matters of policy to the very foundations of medieval English society, challenging the idea that peasants would be their lord's property, giving them the freedom to move wherever they wished, to seek employment. These things would break open the great chain of being, the idea that there are certain castes or levels in society where people are appointed to. And fundamentally, they would have stripped the heart of medieval England out of itself. It would have been a totally new form of society. And yes, they still wanted the king to be in charge, but they themselves would be dictating their own laws. They themselves would be governing themselves in all but name. So this was a very radical revolutionary movement. At least it was shaped in that way by those men who took leadership of it, men like Wat Tyler and the priest John Ball. However, the peasants' revolt, despite massively outnumbering the regime in London, who were short of troops given they were fighting in France, they still failed. And this was because of their ambition. Their ambition was not to overthrow the king and his government, but rather to reform it. And thus they still had trust that the king would deliver on their demands, that if he agreed to do what they wished, they would disperse and he would still carry on. They thus allowed him to have time and freedom to react, not in the moment, not when the events were taking place, but afterwards, once the peasants had disseminated, then he could strike, and then he could punish those who had been involved. So this mass movement was a failure, primarily because of its organisation and because of its aims. And this is a lesson for populism today.